All right, so Johnny, welcome, and good to have you here with us for the as a Q&A, I guess, for your film. Um, so I'm Sergey. I'm the co-founder of CCIFF, and as well as work and teach at Concordia. So um, we do that's our 10th edition. That's done in cooperation with the Cannes Film Day, presented by Real Canada. So, Asmat, you're next.
Yes, my name is Asmat. I'm currently in my third year with CIFF. I'm the executive director, which is a lot of fun now. So I'll be just helping direct this year's festival. I'm so glad to be co-hosting with Cannes Film Day. Go ahead, Winda.
Yes, and I'm Winda. I'm a project manager at CCIFF, and I've been with CCIFF for 6 years. I also help with the event coordinations and screenings, and it's a great pleasure to have you here with us for this Q&A. So thank you so much for joining us. With that said, let's begin with the questions. So, we know that you're born in Shanghai and raised in Toronto, and you have established a distinctive voice in global cinema, known for blending lyrical visuals with grounded social themes. So, the film To Live to Sing tells the story of a Sichuan opera troupe fighting for survival in the shadow of rapid urban development. It's a very moving tribute to tradition, community, and art in transition. So again, thank you for being here with us today, Johnny. And now could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Johnny Ma, and I'm the writer and director of this film, To Live the Same, that you guys just watched. So, we shot this film back in 2018 in Chengdu, Sichuan, like a suburb there, and we used a real opera troupe. So, um, yeah, I mean the film premiered in 2019 at the Cannes Film Festival, and so it's been several years, since we showed the film. And it's interesting. I've always said that this film, with time, it kind of gathers more meaning and because it's about something that is being lost. And I think we're in a moment where we're losing many, many things, So I thought about the film recently and I thought, wow, how appropriate to think about the film again.
Could you share with us what inspired you to tell the story? And was there a specific moment or personal event that motivated you to tell this tale?
Yeah. Well, so what happened was that after my first film that I shot, it was called Old Stone, and usually what happens when a filmmaker makes their first independent film is that they become very, very poor, so they need work, jobs and things like that. So, and like and now like many years later, I think about everything that happens in sort of an artist's life. Like everything is sort of serendipity, things happen for a reason. So at that moment, I was approached by a friend of a friend who offered me a job and told me that, and they showed me this like documentary that was made by a local TV person from Sichuan, and it was of the daily life of an opera troupe, and the job was that they wanted a film script to be written from that documentary for two very famous actors, in China. And so it was going to be a film, a TV show, whatever it was. And so, I looked at the film and I thought, wow, it's very interesting, the documentary, that the people were very alive, and dramatically, like in the story of the documentary needed some help in order to create an arc that was for sort of a fictional, like from a dramatist point of view. But then what happened was that so I took it as a job, but then the organizers of this project kept saying, but you should go and visit them, you should meet them, and I thought, what was the point? I mean, this is a work, and I see the documentary, all I have to do is create the dramaturgy so that it's interesting enough to watch. Because at that time I didn't see it as my project, and then but they insisted, and when I went there with a couple of friends and also my producer at the time, and we had such a great time with the opera troupe that it was that connection, and I felt at that moment, thought to myself, it's like, wow, wouldn't it be really nice to be able to make this project, but not with actors, from Beijing or Shanghai, but with them. That was the seed of the idea. And so after I finished the script and the job, I passed it back to the producers. And after about 7, 8 months, I asked them what was happening. And because it was nothing that was actually happening, I proposed to them that they would allow me to take the rights back for the project and I would try to make the film. But I had one insistence was that I wanted to make it with the real life people, So that was, I mean, every film is a miracle, And so that film, thinking about it now, it was absolutely like non-professional actors, in China making, playing themselves. It was kind of an insane thing that we were asking for, and so the fact that that film exists, is its own miracle, basically.
Did your own journey and life experiences influence the way you approached creating the story as well as filming?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I feel like, obviously I had just come off my first film where I was learning about who I was as a filmmaker, and at that moment I started to realize that where I lived, as a creative voice was sort of between two cultures, bring and practically between two different types of genres. So all my films, they sort of kind of, you know, they started one thing and they sort of morph into something else because of the story, but also because of me. I always kind of try to see a story in two different cultures and how different audience would look at it. And with regards to, to live to sing, I'm not a Sichuan opera. I don't know much about opera. However, when I did grow up in China, opera was a part of my like childhood because my grandmother, enjoyed watching the Beijing opera and things like that. So as a child, I always saw sort of these performers as sort of like bigger than life, characters, heroes, in some way. And that's kind of a connection to sort of the characters that I always write about, sort of characters that once were heroes, but in the modern age, they were kind of born out of time, and that's kind of where I find the sort of the societal conflict in sort of the films. So and I think that the main thing that really like sparked sort of where the film needed to go was when I asked, because the fact that a documentary already existed of these opera troupe, I asked, why do we need to make a fictional one? What's the difference? What am I bringing to the table that isn't already told in the documentary? And so when I asked the main opera troupe leader, Zhao Li, I said, what do you like, what happens when you get on the stage? Like, what do you think about? And she's like, well, when I get on the stage, I am that character and I'm in those, in those stories of like, mythical proportions where I'm playing, like these opera stories are like bigger than life, and it's only when the story, like when she looks out into the audience and when the show is finished, she sees, oh, there's only 5 people out there and we didn't make money. That's when the reality sets in. So I felt that as a fiction film, we could take the audience into that time, into the story where they are these mythical heroes, sort of say.
Regarding the opera, you mentioned they came out and the audience is either there or not there um, for a particular night, and that can have a big impact on them.
Yeah, I mean, that thing that you just said, it's like there's so many, so many things I can answer in different ways, of
Yeah.
the feeling, the sentiment that you just said, I think that I'll share this. I mean, the film was post-produced in Argentina, where I was the editor was Argentinian, and so my first test audience was an Argentine audience,
Oh,
which
wow.
is known for being very, they're very cultured and they have a very certain, to use the word snobbish taste in cinema, and here was I showing them a story that, they would never have imagined to watch, and I needed them to feel emotionally from it. And I remember sort of showing it to them. And from our first test screening, we invite different people, cineastas, filmmakers, and there was one person that came that was a anthropologist. Actually, she was a student as an and she said something that was I still remember it to this day. And maybe this relates to what Asmat is saying. she says it's almost like getting an inside view of something that I would never understand, but with my own eyes, and that's something, you talk about the audience, there's the audience of the theater, the Chinese audience that they're there, and that's a relationship that they have with the performers. But then there's the audience everywhere, that watch it. And most people don't understand or know about opera or what they experience. And the goal of cinema is to make the audience, be able to relate to them. And that's also why we use, Western opera music to basically comparison, because that is, to me, it's the same level of art form, it's the same history.
Yeah, I have another question. So, what shaped the creative and thematic direction for the project?
There's the how to bring the audience into the opera story. Essentially we realized that what we were doing was creating our own opera. And that's where the little the dwarf character came in, and also the sort of the ending where sort of they became, the opera troupe themselves, the music became the spirits that continues to live on, in that way. Like, it's my interpretation of what an opera would be. From a thematic point of view, I would say, I mean, like one of the things I noticed is that as as an artist, you continue to make more work, you start to change your perspective of the world. My first film, Old Stone, was a very different kind of mood and than To Live the Same, because it had there was a lot of anger and resentment towards, sort of how the modern society changes a good person, so the film ends in a very dark, and hopeless way in some way. And that was who I was at that moment when I was making that film, but 3 years later, I think that I matured in some way. Mature is a good way. I mean, there's many ways to look at it. My job was to make the film live, in some way. And if I made another film with an ending like Old Stone, it would suffer the same ending, which would be we would be banned, so I had to, out of survival, look for another ending, but also, because it was the opera troupe, they were so alive, they didn't care about, political statements or anything like that. So and so that pushed me to sort of look beyond, what is after, let's say, change, like to use a good word, because I think that's the thing that we're all kind of afraid of right now. We're afraid of something that we're used to changing, and so To Live the Same, the ending of that story, I think that's where thematically it differs from my first film, because I was looking beyond what can come after, the fear of change, essentially.
Indeed, there feels like there's a lot of change going on in this day and age. So I feel like your message can definitely be relatable to what's going on a like wider scale. Yeah. But
Yeah,
I do
I
agree.
mean,
It's like spirits live on, kind of.
see, I mean, this is the funny thing about cinema. It's like sometimes, a piece of art, you make it, and it starts to take on meanings later on. I noticed that I'm watching a lot of like 70s, 80s films right now, because in some way they're talking about right now, a lot of the dystopian sci-fi films, or, the American courtroom dramas, that talk about the justice system. Like, this is absolutely what we're experiencing at this moment. So sometimes, cinema, like, cinema is different than, like the what the industry tell you, what Hollywood tries to provide. Like, the thing about cinema is that it has a life of its own. And To Live the Same, by watching it later, here now, I think that it's a different kind of movie, because I think about right now. I mean, even when I made the film, I remember going to Cannes. Some people said, "Oh, this is like what's happening with independent cinema." At the time in 2019, I didn't quite understand it, because I was just a filmmaker trying to make it. But now I very much understand what they were saying, and it is true. It's, like with that perspective, one can see To Live the Same in a very different way, in context to sort of what we do in all art forms, basically.
That is true.
Yeah.
I think it's more like a spiral. It keeps on going and you come back to the same topics over and over.
Yeah, I think so. It's a very you talk about the spiral. I'll think about that because it is true. I mean, they say there's only 12 stories that are ever told, and the idea of accepting change and moving on to find life after death, or something like that. This is a particular genre of film. Just like my first film, I mean, every story sort of belongs to sort of this archetypes of stories. And these 12 stories, as we go through time, seems to take on different meanings as like I think about like cinema as like a time capsule. So we capture that moment of Sichuan
Snapshot.
opera because yeah, like if the opera people were here, they would talk about what's currently happening in an opera. And as you can imagine, it's just it's gotten this harder than ever, just like every single art form. So and so I think that from many perspective, oh, to live to sing is one thing, and just from a very practical, it's like we were anthropologists and we captured a moment in time when that thing was still around because no longer would you be able to find troops like that anymore. I think just 5 years later, basically.
That's sad, but maybe they will also evolve, right? They will maybe become modernized while blending a traditional representation, cultural representation in a modern, maybe more technological way of rendering even bigger performances so they can captivate the audience even more, maybe. That's because
Well,
that's
I feel like you're saying something that could be applied to what we were talking about with AI and everything.
exactly.
It's just it's our human minds are very funny. We can find any ways to justify anything. But it's also okay to just accept, the reality of what's going on. And some of that is sad, and it's okay to be sad about these things because, when we were there making that film, the last scene where we had these old people, come and say goodbye to the opera troupe, we basically said, the opera troupe asked me to shoot that scene. They said, hey, if we were going to end, we would have one last meal and probably people would come, we would invite our friend. I said, okay, let's do that scene. So really, we couldn't really, we just told them, we said, hey, why don't you invite all the people that are actually your friends and fans, like your closest. We didn't cast that scene. We basically said just invite who you want to invite. So those are the people that showed up there, and and they had to basically reenact a scene that they were all afraid of, which is to say goodbye. And the thing that you just said means nothing to the people, the old
To
people
those people,
who,
yes,
yeah,
yes,
who
exactly.
were who basically the reality of it is that they're saying goodbye, and so and that moment was for them, and to me that was I think about that moment a lot, and it's one of the most touching moments in the film because it's very much real, and that's just that.
Well, I guess that's how you approach that's Zhao Li's character and her journey and how it was crafted, right?
Yeah, I mean, you try to work with the character. I always told her, I said, this is not you completely. It's an aspect of you that we are going to amplify. So to create this certain distance from it. But yes, it's her. It's also me. It's like when you create a piece of work like that, like everyone sort of you know, like everyone kind of is a part of that contribution of the making of cinema. Cinema is like it's like a big creative atomic bomb, that drops. And no and as a director, to for anyone to take just complete how do I say, like like as if the director did it all. It's insane, because everyone was a part of that thing. And the best thing you can do as a director or a writer is to say yes or say no, let's try it. That's kind of always been my theory about it. So in the end, I want to be surprised by my own movie because certainly when I started working on Tulip, or even before, I didn't think ever I was going to make a Sichuan opera movie.
That's true. I mean, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Um,
it's just, I mean, life led me to that, and I did
yes,
it. And now, I mean, I am, amongst all my contemporary, I can say no one's ever made a Sichuan opera music, opera movie.
Very
So
original. Yeah.
yeah. So the character Zhao Li is actually a name. It's a character name, right? So it's portrayed by Zhao Xiaoli, I guess.
Zhao Li, I mean, it is her name. It is her
It's
name.
her name,
Yeah,
but
it's her name.
okay, it's
Yeah,
the same name.
yeah, it's a yeah, I don't know if it was a good idea, but obviously, I guess I did that because I wanted her to bring more of herself into
So
the
okay,
project, into the character. Because I mean, she's a non-professional actor, so it was much easier for her to just be herself, and then, like I said, amplify one aspect of her character, of her person.
do you still keep in touch with the troupe with her?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I Dan, she's married now with a kid, and Zhao Li, I believe that after, the film experience, she's teaching, in schools, which is in some way, as sad as, like you said, about the end of their craft, something new comes around. It's the fact that
Right.
she's teaching the next generation of kids, the fact that they're making it a curriculum or a part of that particular school. I don't know how widespread it is, it's something positive that we can all cling to, but um I mean, life goes on, right? Like, this is the thing of the message of the film, is that, so the fact that they got to live in the film the worst nightmare, so the future isn't so
Isn't so
interesting.
terrible.
Yeah, isn't so terrible. Once you see how your worst fear is, in front of 2,000 people at Cannes Film Festival, you're like, okay, that's
Okay.
fine.
Okay, I
Yeah.
see. So, but I guess you still manage to show this tension between the looming modernization and the tradition, and how it's all this urbanization was, taking away their spaces, their sacred spaces where they were performing. And so in this loss, all this kind of, in a way, of identity and resistance, what kind of message we were trying to convey in that? You were trying to show, I guess, okay, we have a heritage. There is this heritage in the form of, let's say, Sichuan opera or elsewhere in China, and how is it being lost or transformed, or what were you trying to put this in a different perspective, I guess, because you're trying to tell a story of us to viewers. So what were you?
Well, okay, why don't I mean, maybe just off the first top of my head, just because we live in 2025 now, like,
Yes.
I can't go back to 2019. I could tell you that, but I think it's more interesting to talk about sort of now, and in the context of sort of where we are in this moment, where I think uh all of us in the next, 3 to 5 years have to somehow face, the idea that, our work, which we always thought it was our identity, who we are is what we do, may not be that anymore. That's kind of the situation, like, we are not what we do, like, we are individuals that are, like, different things, and what we do is one aspect of who we are. However, it has been, I don't know for how long, maybe through since the history of time, who we are is what we do. It has been defined that by that. But maybe this is the first time in the history of, our humanity, where we really are facing identity crisis, because who am I, Johnny Ma, if I'm not a filmmaker? And who are you, Sergey, if you're not, what you do? And same thing with Asma and Winda. It's a very hard, thing to face, and as artists, we're already facing that, with
That's
the,
true.
the current situation in the industry. It's very difficult to make movies now, even more difficult than, when To Live the Same was being made. So suddenly we are being faced with a life without the work that we have worked so hard for. And that's what To Live the Same really is, is just to show you that it's not the end of the world, that perhaps, that even as everything lays and crumbles, the spirits would live on, at least in that film. I like to say more, like if I make another film about sort of this continuation of, let's say you talk about the thematic things, I like to, I mean, what is cinema now? What can it do if it, I mean, there's a certain type of escapism that people that the industry is telling us about, but I think that, cinema is always about hope, of reflecting on this current situation. And in this moment right now, I think what we do need is a little hope of what is after, the thing that we're most afraid of, basically.
That is actually quite true. And I also got into filmmaking a little bit in the last 2 summers just to try, because never been doing it before, just being involved in a film festival. So just to see like this type of hope. And you're right, it's tough to make movies. You had this entire non-professional actors crew, basically, or cast rather, not crew, cast.
Yeah.
From the opera. So at one hand, they are professional opera performers. On the other hand, like you mentioned, they're non-professional cinema or movie actors and actresses. And that potential maybe could show when they're performing their own stage act of the Sichuan opera versus when they're like normal people outside of the opera performance. So, how do you play? Did any of that play any factor in producing the performance?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
Genuine and
yeah, I mean, as a director, you kind of always creating the environment where you can get the best, performances on your actors, and we have these actors who have been, stage actors for over 10, years, if not their whole life. But it's a very different type of acting than cinema, and so, I mean, we would get this, I'll give you one little example. So one of the characters, the Zhao Li's husband would ask me, he's like, when we're rehearsing and stuff, he's like, where's the audience? Where's the camera? Meaning, where's the camera? I said, well, the camera. So where the camera is going to be there. So, and suddenly he goes like this, and because like the stage acting puffs up his shirt and he talks and suddenly his whole performance changes, and I said, oh, no, that's not what we do, So just to get out of these bad habits, I would call bad habits for cinema, we had to like create this infrastructure where, um, we built that theater. So that theater was based on an old theater that they had in the same location as they had an old theater. So we created this theater, we built rooms in there where they could live. And then we actually moved the opera troupe into the theater where we paid their salary, what they would usually get when they go perform opera. So they were essentially like employees, but also living inside the opera like 2 months before we even started shooting. And so the first month, it was just them getting used to this thing. And then we would start rehearsing every single day, but not like actual scenes from it, but we would do things that are like improv classes and things like that, because you have basically 12 people in every scene. And that's a very difficult scene to direct, as a director. So I needed them to work, as a team to really understand how to listen to each other and like to know sort of the coordination, like a dance opera, that dance troupe in some way. So that was a whole thing, but it really paid off for us because, a month in, at first we built the theater and I would talk over with the art director. I'm like, something is not quite right, but 2 weeks after the opera troupe have actually lived in that space, I'm like, oh, it's perfect. So it's just that lived in sort of feeling. And then, at the very end of the film, I think there's a scene in the film where the actual theater collapses, that blows up. We actually did that, for real. we
oh wow,
we
okay.
dynamited the whole place. So we did that on the very last day of filming. So that was a very how do I say, like, emotional day for
Yeah, sad. It's actually
yeah.
a
I mean,
distraction.
it's the movie. I mean, it is actually the story, and we all had to live through it by actually creating that explosive, kind of. I mean, that scene, everything was, there's, I mean, the digital effect from it is just only the ropes, that we were making the chairs fly up, but everything, we actually did put a thing through the roof, at one point.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess there was a lot of, in this process of 2 months, you had a lot of collaboration going on probably between everybody in the cast and the crew. Do you have any kind of memorable moments from that process that you could share?
Yeah, of course. I mean, like, that's the one of the beautiful thing when you work with non-professional actors, it's like, you have time. When you have time, you can create like things that are you can collaborate. You can really live there. And so, every day they were living in the theater, and we lived in a little hotel next to it. And sometimes it's very funny because, like they're not children. They're not, they're adults, and they have their own lives that they do. So I remember one of the things I learned was it's very interesting. I mean, just since you asked me that question, this is the first thing that popped in my mind is that every single night, rather than like sleeping and go to the rest, they'll gamble. For some reason, Chinese people really like to gamble. Like I never really understood it, but then when I saw them, because I'm the director, and sometimes I come in and but not when they're gambling. They don't give a shit about who I am. They're just gambling. And it's really, I mean, nothing like would scare them, and they're just in there, and they'll play all night. So that was the only
Okay.
thing that we had to like, say, hey, don't no gambling tonight, that kind of thing, because but they live a very different life, because the life of an opera troupe, it's a very different routine. They perform every single day. They used to be called like the fire torch operas. That's how they did it. They would travel through different places, and they would just put down like a fire torch and then perform around the torch.
Oh,
And that's
wow. Okay.
that's how it first began. And now progressing through in the way that they are. And, there are little moments in the film where, let's say the young person is, on TikTok and dancing. These are just things that obviously we're just observing, in the moments. And I mean, like, you see the dogs that are in the film. I mean, those are dogs that the art directors, whenever they drive around, like the crew just would pick up. So by the end, we had 15 dogs or something like that we just picked up along the road. And because when we were playing, when we were filming there every single day, we would have a lot of food, so the dogs were very well fed. So it's very interesting how we can, because when we first got into that place, it was a completely how do I say, abandoned, area.
Deserted?
Yeah, deserted, and we brought life back to that area, just with culture, with culture and food. That's really the answer. Like just, we put on free shows, and then there was food for the dogs, and suddenly it felt like there was life there again.
Oh, that's nice. Nice. Any happy accidents?
Oh, I mean, of course, lots. I mean, the elf that you saw in the film. I mean, we saw that maybe like 15 days before the film, and I changed the entire script to add the elf into the thing because
Ah,
I
okay.
thought it was so funny, that I didn't know what it meant, but I knew that it had to be a part of the film somehow, and so and that's, those are the things that when you keep an open mind to, I mean, cinema is a process. If the film came out exactly how I wrote it, then I would actually consider it a failure, because I didn't keep open to the many uh things that were happening, in the location, so and that's sort of why cinema is an alive thing. You're working with 100 people sometimes, and everybody's creating, everybody's making something really unique and interesting, so there's many, I mean, like every single moments in the film, you could say it's a happy accident, because uh we have a plan of what we're looking for. And if I got something a little different that is actually more real and interesting, it's, rather than saying, oh, no, 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 I want it that way, to actually be like, okay, that's interesting. What just happened there? And that's something that's um certainly, I mean, for example, there's a peacock in the film, and the reason why there's a peacock in the film is because there was an actual peacock living the next door. And at first we thought, oh, but the peacock is really loud. We were thinking about sound, because if when you're thinking of
Right.
filming, like every single day, at any moment, the peacock could just go. And the peacock has a really loud, ugly scream. It's like, like this. And so, and then they told me that they're like, oh yeah, we're going to get rid of the peacock. I'm like, where are you going to take it? Well, we bought it and we send it to a place and they're going to kill it. And I said, no, 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 don't do
Oh
that.
no.
So then we said, okay, the peacock can stay and we'll just make it a part of the movie. It would just be one other weird
Element.
detail in the movie that makes no sense, but why not? It's just China, basically.
I was curious, how was the film received in China as opposed to Canada, or even with like a Sichuan audience?
Yeah, it's
Feedback.
unfortunately the film opened in the pandemic, so I wasn't in China when it did open, but I know that it traveled through the big cities, Sichuan, Chengdu, Chongqing, all of the Beijing, all the spots. As I mentioned, the two actors, that I was originally writing this story for, they were a part of the film eventually in the end as executive producers. So they were very helpful in getting the film seen by, a film like this in China has no life. I mean, the whole reason why we tried to get the film in the Cannes was just to give it life because we were told from the very beginning that a film with non-professional actors would just have no audience in China, and that's the practical way of looking at things. So it did go around, and and it had a theatrical, a small, very small one in China. Unfortunately, I don't know. I mean, I think that I think a lot of people were very surprised, that to see a film like this, they didn't think a film like this could exist. That's usually what I hear. And when I did meet students, I showed it when I've been at sort of film festivals or especially when there's Chinese audience involved, they were very especially the ones that understand Sichuan accents. They were they wanted to share, that they were very happy to hear accents from their hometown. I remember this old person that came into the theater, somebody wheeled them in. And I was usually I don't sit with the audience. I kind of sit in the back. So I saw this person, and there was no way that this person had the eyesight that could actually see the theater or to see the screen. But I think that they were listening.
Mhm.
I think that so it's a very I always said that, it's a very beautiful thing to take sort of the older generation to see because it reminds them of because there are a lot of movies being made for that generation, or even adults, like every film that's
Right.
being made now is like, who is it for? It's for for the kid, for the it's not really for adults anymore,
Did you
unfortunately. So,
take that into account when you had the visual style, like whether you're gonna have more of an adult look to it or more of this free form, dreamlike look?
no, I mean, when we were making, especially when you're making films in China, you try to keep it simple, because you don't know, there's so many things. I mean, I wasn't thinking about an audience in Canada or in, in anywhere. I was just thinking about the audience there, in China, in that little village, So I was thinking about we were making the film for them, really, Later on, little by little, when I was in Argentina, I was thinking, okay, how would a Western audience watch this story and things like that. But from a visual story style, I mean, I was thinking, for example, the only opera movie that I know of that anyone would ever know of would be Farewell My Concubine, So I kind of said to everyone that in my crew, I said, this is the anti Farewell My Concubine movie. So meaning that everything that is in Farewell My Concubine, let's watch it and let's make sure that we don't do that, because it's
Right.
just too well known of a movie for us to even try to pay homage to, So
Mm.
I would say that would be the only thing that we were thinking. I mean, I was very aware that we were in uncharted territory, dealing with Chinese opera, like in a independent cinema of some sort. So I was then that's also why a reason why I took the film to Argentina rather than my first film was edited in New York, and has a very different editing speed or tech or tempo, because I was aware that we were doing something that was a little different, and I was completely fine if To Live the Same came out to be much more experimental than it actually came out to be.
Kind of like that peacock.
Yeah, yeah, because
Yeah.
there's so many things were happening that we just had to accept and try to fit it into the film, and then later on in the edit, we were sort of creating, piecing together what could be a story. And and then, in hindsight, looking back, I think that cinema is never finished. It's only finished because at that
Right.
moment, Cannes accepted our film and we had to premiere it. But I think that we had created the segments where, I mean, when I say that the film turns into an opera, some people can only feel it just maybe a little bit, but like we could have made it much more clear that, hey, this is an opera, and like things like that.
Right, right.
Yeah, but
You mentioned Cannes. So what was that like? What was the reception like? Did you?
yeah, well, it was, as a filmmaker, young filmmaker, going to Cannes is obviously a dream, that everyone has. So the fact that I got to do that is beautiful, I get to live it. However, also, as a lot of, people who have gone to Cannes have told me before I went that, Cannes is a dream of some sort, and that's what I saw, the Cannes Film Festival is, um, how do I say this in the nicest way? It's not always for cinema. There's so many things around the Cannes Film Festival that is actually the most important thing. It's.
Right,
I mean, if someday, in the future, aliens sort of look at the history of time in the world, they'll see a lot of like lights, flashing around, the Riviera in France, in the south of France during that time, and they will be like, oh, what's going on? And really, what is actually going on is the wealthiest people in the world are having their vacations on their yachts there, and the festival is really a reason, to bring the starlets over there so that, there's a reason. So, I mean, that's what I saw, just to take it out the grandeur illusion of it, because, I think that in this moment, like cinema, like we used to think that, Cannes is sort of, where the real cinema lives, and the best cinema in the world still goes to Cannes. However,
right,
I think that all those platforms, just like Hollywood, they no longer, once you're really in it, you start to see, oh, it's not as, it's not as, it's an illusion. In the end, the real, true, honest thing is the audience.
right,
And Cannes
right.
Film Festival has a very beautiful theater. There's a lot of audience there watching cinema. And that's really why it's so beautiful. The first time you show a film to an audience is a very magical moment, because that's the moment where the film is finished. Like as a filmmaker, that's also when I get to see what I have made. We can watch it 1,000 times before, and we don't really know what the reaction is going to be. And it was a very beautiful reaction. And I think that for a film like that, to have an audience, in that place is I mean, it was very humbling, let's say. But also, there was a moment where I thought, did I do the film justice by bringing it into the Cannes
Right,
Film Festival,
right.
because it's such a cutthroat environment, where people are looking for the most perverse films or the most risky film, and To Live to Sing is a very gentle film that maybe another festival would have been more calmer and more like nurturing for it, but it is the thing happened, and that's how the story will be told.
So going forward, what's next for you? Any interesting collaborations? Are you working on something that you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think that since when after To Live to Sing, I moved back to North America, and I finished one film that premiered last year at TIFF, and that film was shot in Winnipeg. And that was a very different film than To Live to Sing. And I've also shot another Mexican film. And now to be
Okay.
honest, I'm kind of more interested to create like a culture bridge between Mexico and Asia, just because, to be honest, like Hollywood is kind of awful. I don't really care for them. I mean, the industry doesn't really deserve our help. They've been exploitive of too many people for too long. So art will continue. I don't know in what form. I think that the thing that sometimes I wonder about cinema, whether or not it will continue, in the way that it will. But storytelling is what matters the most, I think. It's like I said, where cinema sort of took over from books as the sort of the kind time capsule that captures the human emotion at that moment, and it's the story of humanity that gets passed on. So if the most important thing, in cinema, I think, is the storytelling, and where that would go, whether or not it stays in cinema or go into another form, I think that there's a group of us that think about that a lot, so because in the end, okay, yes, we can make more money, we can be more famous, but is that really what we care about? Or and I mean, I always try to keep it simple, like To Live to Sing. It's really difficult to make a movie, and it's even more difficult to make a really good movie. So all you really try to do is have an adventure with the people that you're having this adventure with, and hopefully, and that's what we did on To Live to Sing. We had an adventure, that's so all of us, the troupe and the crew, like we all have that experience that we keep very fondly, because even for the people who work in China, in the film industry, this is a very unique movie that we made, an experience, let's say.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. Also, there's that idea of the art of storytelling. I mean, that's really what it is, right? So, uh, I mean, thank you so much for interviewing with us. We appreciate it.
Hey,
Um, we're glad to be able to screen your film, To Live to Sing, Cannes Film
yes.
Day. Thank you so much.
Then we're actually looking forward to your other films. I think, what was your other film that you mentioned? The Mother and the Bear.
The Mother and the Bear, yeah, that's the film that came after To Live to Sing. Yeah. I mean,
It
I
was
don't
last year,
maybe
right?
yeah,
So
yeah, maybe if I don't know. Like it should come out in Canada. I mean, right now everything is, up in the air in the film industry. So I mean, it's up for the audience to see the connections, because there is a connection, I mean, there's a facet of my films that I made in China. There are a particular aspect of my identity, and here in Canada is another aspect. Yeah, great.
Thank you so much.
I,